Hey everybody, welcome to part one of building your own ChatGPT front end in Python. So the purpose of this series is to help you build the framework that you need to interact with ChatGPT from your front end applications or your database applications or any application that you're actually using in your business. Okay, so right now, most people who interact with ChatGPT do it through the OpenAI website. And what we're going to build is we're going to build the functionality of the ChatGPT website, but we're going to build it in Python so that we can put our own front end on it. So the idea for this comes from one of my podcasts where I talk about how to introduce AI to your business. And so let me just talk real quick about this chart. So if you're introducing AI to your business, over here on the left part of this chart, you've got these simple applications, starting with just letting your employees just run wild with ChatGPT. But the way ChatGPT hallucinates, the way it gives results that sometimes people don't read and then they cut and paste, this is just turning ChatGPT loose on your employees is kind of dangerous. So the next step up the path is teach them things about the prompt, teach them how to use the website, and give them prompt training. But in a lot of cases, that isn't worth it either. So what we're going to be talking about in this course is building out this part in green, which is the ChatGPT API. So that would allow us to build front-end applications that are based on the API. We can build a custom front end to our business. We can access our company data through the database. And then we can start to implement things like vector databases. So if we look at this introducing AI to your business as 3 steps, the first one being just giving them access to the ChatGPT website. Over here on the other side, we're going to create and train custom models and fine-tune the large language model. But what we're talking about in this course is this part in the middle, building the ChatGPT APIs. So the first thing we're going to do is build a Python API center, we'll call it. We're going to be building this piece right here, the application server. So if we look at how an application architecture works with the API, we have our desktop or our mobile apps. Okay, and we're going to say these are written in Angular. Now, this could be written in Angular, React, Vue, any front-end desktop application or mobile application IDE or framework that allows you to talk to an application server. So you make calls to the application server with HTTPS, and the application server returns JSON. And that's going to be the same whether your Angular app is on a desktop or on a mobile device. So what we're building today, what we're starting with is this application server. So we're going to use Python, Fast API, and then the web server, which is Unicorn, along with the PyCharm IDE, to build Python code that talks to the desktop and the mobile app, and then restructures the prompt to talk to the ChatGPT API. So what we're basically doing is we're building this area here that intercepts the messages from the desktop app and the mobile app, might change the prompt, might get data from the database, and then sends it to OpenAI to get completion results. So our goals of this is we're going to build the foundation necessary to use ChatGPT in your Python programs. We're going to build Python Fast API endpoints that can be called from our Angular application or our React application. We're going to come up with a way to interact with the database so we can keep track historically of the queries that we've made to ChatGPT and the things that it responded to. And then in a future episode, we are going to build a custom front end in Angular that ties this whole thing together. So we've got some resources. The place to go first is go to GitHub, and under Kinetic C's, under GitHub, go to Kinetic C's. We have ChatGPT API Part 1. And so that is going to be the code that we're creating in Part 1. Now what we're doing in Part 1 is we're just going to do the basics. We're going to make sure we have Python installed. We're going to start our Fast API project inside of PyCharm. We're going to use our API keys to make some basic requests to ChatGPT. Then in the next episode or the next lesson, what we're going to do is we're going to refactor it, turn it into class libraries, make it a little bit more stable Python code. Then we're going to start talking about how to store data. We're going to access, we'll access a MySQL database, and then we will expand on this. So right now what we're looking to do is everything that is in ChatGPT API Part 1. I'm going to actually bring that up myself so that I can follow along and copy and paste code. And then we're going to go from there. So let's get started. Okay, so the first thing we need to do to make sure that we have what we need is we need to go and make sure we have Python installed. So if you don't have Python installed, you can go to www.python.org/downloads. Now, I'm on a Mac, but it's the same on a Windows. You want to open up a terminal, and I have a terminal opened up, and I'm going to type in Python 3 and then space -- version. And in this case, I have Python 3.11.5 installed. So that is actually the version that I want to use. So we're good to go. I know that the newest version is 12, but one of the things used by Fast API does not currently support Python 12. So I'm going to go Python 3.11. Okay, so now if I did not have it, I could go here to download for Mac OS, follow the bouncing ball, and install Python. Now this may require a reboot. So before you go too much further, make sure that you can do the Python 3 -- version, and you get a result here and where it shows that it's open or that it's installed. Okay, so that's the first step, is making sure that we have Python. Now, I like using PyCharm as my IDE. Now, I don't necessarily like doing it for the best reasons in the world. I like it because it does a lot of completions for you. It's very easy to use. And most importantly, I don't have to keep track of all these crazy packages in order to make a fast API project. And I like using Visual Studio Code when I code in Angular. That way, if I have multiple windows open, if I see that it is in PyCharm, I know it's Python. And if I see that it is in Visual Studio Code, I know it's Angular. Not the greatest reason in the world, but it is a good reason. The other thing I like about PyCharm, the Community Edition tells you enough that you don't need to pay for PyCharm, but you also need to, but it does do a lot of corrections for you. It gives you best practices. It corrects your code. So I definitely like it. So if you go to jetbrains.com, PyCharm download, in my case, it knows that I'm on a Mac. You go over here to the download button and you follow the bouncing ball. You do not necessarily have to pay for it. So just keep that in mind. The Community Edition is perfectly fine. So at this point, we should have Python installed and PyCharm installed. Now, once PyCharm is installed, I can go over here to my launch, see PyCharm over here, and I open it up. So this is my PyCharm IDE, and I will be talking about it in great detail. So our next step after this is we need to make sure that we have an OpenAI account and API keys. So if I go to OpenAI.com, I hit login. I'm already logged in. So then what I can do is I can go click over here to API. And then once in the upper left-hand corner, I see that my account information is here. So this is my personal account. I can click on this and then go to View API Keys. Now, when you create a new API key, it is going to, you're only going to see it once. So in this case, I'm going to create a new secret key. So what I need to do is I click on Create a New Secret Key and give it a name. So I'm just going to call this Project 1 Key. I'm going to delete this as soon as I'm done recording. So you go into Create a Secret Key. And so now it's going to create this key for you. And I actually want to copy it. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to click on Copy. And now I'm going to go back to my terminal. And this is just because I am going to use it in the code. And we're just going to read it out of a file. So if I go to ls, if I do an ls, I have a file here called open_API --key.txt. Okay, so inside of this, I actually have the OpenAPI key that I'm going to use. So in our code, what we're going to do is we're going to read this file to get the key, and then we're going to pass it in. That way I don't have to worry about my key being up on GitHub. The other way to do this is with an environment variable. But I like reading from the file because that way I can change my API key kind of on the fly. So at this point, we have our secret key. We have our Python is installed, and we have PyCharm. So I'm going to go over to PyCharm to get started. And what I want to do is create a new Fast API project. So I'm going to go File, New Project. And once I start a new project, over here to the left, I can choose, do I want it to be pure Python, Django, Fast API, Flask, or any of these other things. I want it to be a Fast API project. So I'm going to click on Fast API, and now it is going to it's going to give it a name. And in this case, it's going to be Fast API Project 1. And that's good enough for me here. So it also shows me what my base interpreter is going to be. It's going to be Python 3.1.1. This is where the virtual environment comes from. And now all I have to do to create this project is to hit create. And I'm going to create it in this window. Okay, so now I have a Fast API project. And let's walk through exactly what this is, because at this point, this is just some basics. Now, if you're new to Python, Python is a very library-based programming language. So what we're doing, when we started this new project, it did a pip install and installed Fast API. So if I go to the terminal and type in pip install Fast API, we're going to see that it was already done. But now if you did it outside, if you were working in, let's say, a Visual Studio Code, you would actually need to do a pip install of Fast API. So in this case, we say from Fast API, import Fast API. That's telling this application that it is a Fast API app. Then in line 3, I am creating a variable called app. This is going to be an object of the class Fast API. And so this means I can use these decorators. So this decorator, the @ sign, is a decorator that says this is what our endpoint is going to be. So this is app.get, and then a / means that if I call this API with nothing after the endpoint, it's going to call this function called root, and it's going to return the message hello world. If I do an app get hello and then with a name afterwards, it is going to have a single parameter called name, and it is going to return hello with the name involved. So just to see how this works, let's run it. So the first thing I'm going to do is up here in PyCharm, I'm going to click on Run where it says Run Fast API Project. And now it is going to launch the Fast API project. Now again, one of the things I like about PyCharm is it is now watching all the files. So when I change the file, it's going to restart Uvicorn, and it's going to restart the Python project. So now I'm going to go back over to my browser, and I'm going to go to localhost 8000. And you see that I got message hello world. And that is because just localhost :8000 is the same as localhost 8000 with a / in front of it. So if I type in now, hello everyone, you can see I've done this before. Now we're going to get the message hello everyone. Now if I go in here and I say goodbye, I am going to get an error. I'm going to get a detail not found because there is no goodbye endpoint. So let me go back over here to my PyCharm project, and I can go here and I can say app get and then goodbye. and then put a name. And then in this case, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to do copy this. So in this case, we're going to call a function called say goodbye. And I change this to goodbye. Okay, see how easy that was? Okay, and I'm getting my little double yellow line because it says I should have 2 lines between functions. So I'm going to save all. Now when I go back over here, my goodbye exists. So we now have our endpoint for goodbye. So if I'm calling this from a get, let's say my Angular application is calling it using RSJX, and it's going to call it using a get, I could call the goodbye and then put the variable in here, and it would get the JSON back. But the thing that I find so intriguing about working with Fast API, even when I'm not working on it specifically for a Fast API project, is if I go up here and just type in docs, it is going to create the Swagger documentation for the endpoints that I've created. This gives me the opportunity to run it from a web page. So in the case of this hello endpoint, I could say hello name. I click over here on try it out, and then I could type in Edward and hit execute. And then you see down here what my response body was. So it said, hello, Edward, and I got a successful response. So this is a way, when you're testing code, this is a way to test things without actually having to call it through the API itself. So that's just one of the things I really like about using Fast API to develop these kind of projects. Now, in this case, we are actually developing something that needs to be in Fast API. Now, the other thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go back to my Python, and I'm going to show you the post. So in this case, we're going to say app.post, and then we're just going to post to the root, and we're going to, in this case, we're going to say async, which means it runs asynchronously, def, which means we're creating a function, and then we're going to call it post hello, and then we're going to say first name is a string, last name is a string, and then the function is going to be, it's just going to be return we're going to call it, we're going to say hello first name and then last name. So now we're actually using a post instead of a get. So in this case, when we post to the root, it is going to expect 2 parameters, a first name and a last name parameter. So I can go here and hit save all. And now when I go back to my code, and reload it, I have a new post, and it's calling the hello function. And so in this case, I put in, when I do try it now, I can type in my name. Okay, so this is how we're passing parameters into the post. Okay, so in this case, we're doing post instead of get, which I know that the traditional way people work is that if you're querying data, you use a get, and if you're posting data and saving data, you use a post. I use post all the time in my Angular. I don't see any reason to show people the URLs that I'm passing into my API, especially if I'm using an SSL certificate or whatever. I don't want anybody to see all my variables. Your variables can also be a heck of a lot longer in a post than they can be in a get. So I use post for almost everything. So we are going to move forward using post for almost everything. Now what I want to do here though is I want to go to my GitHub, and I want to bring up, so I'm on my GitHub for ChatGPT API Part 1, and I'm going to open up main.py. And this is going to tell us, I'm going to use this kind of as a model for moving forward on the project. So the first thing we want to do here in line 2 is we want to import OpenAI. And then up here on line 1, we want to also use HTTP exception. And I will show you why in just a second, but let me go back over here to my PyCharm. Now, before I can import OpenAI, I need to install it. So I'm going to come out down here to the left. I'm going to hit terminal. And I'm going to do pip install OpenAI. So now it is going out and it has brought down OpenAI for me. So I'm going to go here and now I can say import OpenAI. Now that I've done that, I can actually use it. So the next thing I'm going to do is I want to use that HTTP exception. And I'm going to talk about exception handlers in a second. They're kind of important. So what I want to do now, though, is I'm going to get rid of this get endpoint. I'm going to get rid of the hello endpoint. I'm just going to leave the post, but we're going to call it chat. So now I'm going to create a chat, and we're going to do something called do chat. And we're not going to have any parameters. So this is just going to be a simple do chat with no parameters. So as of right now, we're going to throw some error messages. So that's definitely not what we want to do. But let me go back to my Google. And so the first thing we need to do when we're using our OpenAI API is pass in our API key. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to copy this and talk through it. It just is a lot easier and faster. So the first thing we're going to do is we need to we need to set the API key to this OpenAI library. Now, if you're new to Python, this is going to be a good demo of how Python can string things together to do more than one thing in a line. So in other languages like PHP, this would probably be about 9 or 10 lines of code, but we're going to be able to get it into one line with Python. So if I say OpenAI .API key, so now I'm actually setting a variable inside OpenAI. Now this part here is I'm going to do an open. So in this case, what we're going to do is we're going to open this file that I pasted my API key in. So this, if this is all we did, this part so far is gonna blow up because all we've done is we set the OpenAI API key to opening a file. And now what we could have done is we could have defined a file, and then our next step would be read. So if we do this, now what we've done is OpenAI key is whatever is in this file. But we know we've got a carriage return at the end, so we're going to strip it. And then we're going to strip the \n off of it. So what we've actually done here, and I need to see why these are two different lengths. I got to spell user right. Okay, so what we've done here is in one line of code, we were setting the API key for OpenAI by opening this file, reading it, and stripping off the \n. So that gets it open. So now the next thing we want to do is we want to do a completion. So let's go over back to our thing and back to our GitHub. And The next thing I want to make sure you understand is the try and exception. So I'm going to copy this part down at the bottom. So what we're going to do is we want to create a try catch block. So to do that, we're going to go in here and we're going to say try. And then we don't want to do anything yet. Then except, and then we have this exception. So in this case, pass is just a command so you don't throw an error. It doesn't actually do anything. It's kind of like null in Oracle. So you do try, and then what we're going to do is if there is an error, we are going to return error code 400, and we're going to return the error. So what this is doing is it is actually capturing the error message that this next thing throws. And we need to make sure that we capture that error because we don't know what it's going to throw. So what we're going to do is we're going to create a completion record. So let me do this. So what we're going to do is we're going to say completion equals OpenAI chat completion create. Okay, and so that's a function. Now inside of the function, we have to pass it. The commands that we want to execute. So in this case, the first thing we want to pass it is the model. So we're going to pass it the fact that we're going to use ChatGPT 3.5 Turbo. And then the other thing we're going to pass it at the bottom is we are going to pass it the maximum number of tokens. So in this case, we are going to say we want you to use GPT 3.5 Turbo. We want you to use a maximum of 300 tokens for your output. Now the next thing we have to pass in is a list. And you probably call it an array. So we want to say messages equals, and then it's a list. And inside that list, we're going to have objects with a message, with a role and a role and a message. Let me just verify that. Role with a so inside of this, we're going to have a role and content. So the role is who is it? Let me make sure, try to figure out why this is not. Okay, so our role in this case is going to be our user. And our content in this case, I want to make sure I use the right thing, is we want to ask it, what is the moon made of? So we're going to say role, user, content, what is the moon made of? And I'm going to come back and explain this in just a second. So we are going to, then what we want to do is return what we got back. So we are going to return message, and we're going to just return completion. So what we're doing here is when we call the do chat, we're getting our API key out of this file. Then we are creating a list of messages, and there's two parts to the messages. There's the role and the content. Now the roles can be user, system, and assistant. So user is the human asking the question. In this case, what is the moon made of? System is some background information that you want to tell ChatGPT before you use it. And then assistant allows you to put in all the previous responses that you received. So in the old API, it was just a prompt and a response, and it would lose its context as to where you are. But in the new version of the API, starting with ChatGPT 3.5 Turbo, you now can manage the entire conversation. So the first thing I want to do here is say, what is the moon made of? So let me do a save all. Now I'm going to go back to my Swagger API and refresh it. Okay, we're going to do chat. So now when I say try it out, because I don't have any parameters, I'm just going to click try it out, then click execute, and now it is running. And we see that ChatGPT returned a response. The moon is primarily made of rock and metal. The surface of the moon is covered with a layer of dust and loose fragments known as regolith, which is made up of various materials such as silicates, basalt, and anthracite. Okay, well, that's kind of cool. So, but let's just say I want that for a 5-year-old. And now I'm going to demo what system does. So we're going to start now. We're going to put a message, role system. And then the content is going to say, answer all questions from the perspective of a 5-year-old. Okay, so now what we're going to do is we're going to give this system a little background information about what we're going to do. And this is important because if you're creating an app for your business, you want to, by default, give it some information about your business so that it finds the right information and it doesn't just make stuff up. So we're going to say File, Save All. Now I'm going to come over here, hit refresh, which I guess I didn't even need to do. That's actually one of the things I like. So I am going to say try it out. I'm going to execute. Okay, so now we're answering it as a 5-year-old. The moon is made of cheese. So it definitely did what I asked it to do. So now a couple things that it's getting back. So we're getting back this message, and this message is coming as the role of an assistant. And then we get some information. We know we used 30 prompt tokens. We had 7 completion tokens for a total of 37 tokens. Now what I want to do is take this, and we're going to go and we're going to change it to the perspective of a chemical engineer. So now answer all questions from the perspective of a chemical engineer. Now when I save it, I go back and I'm going to hit execute again. And this time it's going to say the moon is primarily made of rocky materials such as silicates and iron, with its surface covered by a layer of fine dust and rocks. Okay, so now what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this array that it just created. I'm going to copy it. I'm going to go over to my Python application, and now I'm going to paste it in. Okay, so now our assistant went and said the moon is primarily made of rocky material such as silicates and iron. I'm just going to clean this up so that I can see it all on the page. Okay, so now the next time we ask a question, we're going to ask that question as we're going to ask that question in context of what we've already been asking. So the next question I'm going to say is role I'm going to just say from a user, and then I'm going to say from content, what is the diameter? Now, in kilometers. So now, the reason I'm doing this is if I was using the old version of the ChatGPT API, we wouldn't have any context here. And this prompt would kind of be a disaster because it wouldn't know that we're talking about the moon. But we are having a conversation about the moon. So in this case, I'm expecting that the next response that it's going to get is going to be about the diameter of the moon, because it's smart enough now to know that that's what we're talking about. So I'm going to hit Save All. I'm going to go back, and now I'm going to rerun it. So now it says the diameter of the moon is approximately 3,474 kilometers, or 2,159 miles. So it knew that we were talking about the moon. So the idea about building your own front end to ChatGPT using Python and using the API means that you need to keep track of the entire conversation as it's going on so that you can pass things in. But what's even more important, so let's go back to our code here. This code could have been executed based on database queries. So we could have said we want to complete a conversation that we've had in the past. Maybe that is in a MySQL database. And we're going to go out and we're going to query other conversations. The use of vector databases comes to mind because sometimes what we might want to do is we might want to take all of the responses we've got and be able to do a similarity search on them. And that's probably a topic we'll cover in another episode for sure. But in this case, what we're doing is mimicking the way ChatGPT website works by keeping context of everything that's going on. And these system role messages allows us to give it some information ahead of time that's going to be really important for making the outputs. So we're going to talk about that a lot more in great detail. And in the next lesson, what we're going to do is refactor this so that we have all of our OpenAI code is going to be in one class. And then we're going to have, we can start accessing a database out of another class, and then we can just do everything that we need to do and have it refactored in such a way that it is a fairly easy to use application and we can keep maintaining it. All right, so I'll see you next time.